She lies, she manipulates, she twists the truth and calls it growth. She insults, discards, betrays, then posts about boundaries, alignment, or protecting her peace. And the moment you push back, you're accused of being toxic, controlling, or worse, another symbol of patriarchy. This isn't accountability. This is ideology wearing lipstick. Modern empowerment has nothing to do with becoming strong. It has everything to do with becoming unquestionable. Žižek would call it moral theater, where the appearance of being harmed is more powerful than truth. As long as she frames herself as a victim of history, she can get away with anything in the present. Because the script is already written. Women have suffered for centuries. Men have oppressed. So whatever she does now, it must be justice. This is how narcissism hides in plain sight. She doesn't have to reflect. She doesn't have to grow. She just has to invoke the myth that anything she does is part of her healing from something you represent. She uses men not as partners, but as props in a drama where she always plays the wounded hero. And here's the trap. The more harm she causes, the more empowered she feels. Because the pain she inflicts is never hers to own. It's always something she was forced to do. By you, by the culture, by the system. This isn't about fairness. It's about control, cloaked in the language of liberation. Žižek warned us, when ideology fuses with identity, it becomes impossible to tell the difference between who someone is and what they're justifying. She doesn't take accountability, she takes the pen. And when the truth doesn't serve her image, she rewrites it. You weren't calm, you were emotionally unavailable. You weren't direct, you were aggressive. You weren't honest, you were trying to control her. Every behavior becomes something else, as long as it protects her from blame. Because in the modern empowerment script, she can't be wrong. She can only be hurt. Žižek calls this ideological self-deception, a defense system where the facts don't matter, only the story does. And the story always starts with one premise. She is the one overcoming harm. So even if she cheats, lies, lashes out, explodes, the damage gets reframed as her response to something external. It wasn't a betrayal, it was a trauma response. It wasn't cruelty, it was setting boundaries. It wasn't manipulation, it was healing her inner child. She doesn't deny what she did, she just changes why she did it. And the why is always someone else's fault. This is how she keeps the image clean, by dirtying everyone around her. Because once she wraps her behavior in the language of empowerment, she becomes morally untouchable. Untouchable people don't evolve. They just double down, and when enough people applaud her victimhood, she starts to believe the lie herself. That's the real danger. Not that she fools others, but that she builds an entire identity out of the belief that nothing is ever her fault. Žižek warns us, this is how narcissism survives in modern culture, by calling itself healing while destroying anyone who challenges the script. You can't reason with her. Not because you're wrong, but because her feelings are now the truth. She doesn't argue, she accuses, she doesn't explain, she declares. And once she declares something, it becomes law. If she says you made her uncomfortable, you did. If she says you were toxic, you are. If she says you crossed a boundary, the conversation ends there. Žižek calls this ideological absolutism, where subjective discomfort becomes objective reality, and any attempt to clarify is labeled as violence. You can't win, not because you're guilty, but because you're a man trying to explain himself. And in her worldview, that's already suspect. This isn't about communication, it's about moral control. She doesn't want understanding, she wants to be undeniable. Because in the modern language of empowerment, any challenge to her interpretation of events is seen as an attack on her identity. Her emotions are sacred, your logic is oppressive, and the moment you speak clearly, she hears it as aggression. The moment you ask questions, she hears it as gaslighting. So now you're stuck in a game you can't play, where she gets to change the rules, shift the meanings, rewrite the past, all while calling it growth. And you're expected to sit quietly in the corner, nodding, agreeing, apologizing for crimes you never committed. Žižek warned us, when emotion becomes ideology, truth dies. And in its place, you get an empire of feelings ruled by someone who's never wrong because she's always working on herself. She doesn't raise her voice. She raises your doubt. She doesn't demand. She withdraws until you fold. This is the new dominance. Not through force, but through silence, tears, and carefully chosen words that make you second-guess everything. She doesn't need to overpower you. She just needs you to feel like you're always one sentence away from hurting her. And once that dynamic is in place, you're done. You stop expressing needs. You soften your voice. You monitor your own honesty. Not because you're abusive, but because she made it feel that way. This is what Žižek would call ideological control through fragility, where someone holds power not by being dominant, but by constantly positioning themselves as too delicate to be opposed. You can't challenge her without being aggressive. You can't step back without being emotionally unavailable. You can't lead without being labeled controlling. So you end up walking on eggshells while she walks freely over your boundaries. Because the moment she cries, you lose. The moment she says she's not feeling emotionally safe, the discussion ends. Your logic dismissed, your point erased. She doesn't need the facts on her side. She has your empathy. She weaponizes softness, but behind it is steel. And that steel cuts you down, one manipulation at a time. Not with fists, not with shouting, but with a system so rigged you feel guilty just for telling the truth. Žižek warned us, when ideology hides behind vulnerability, it becomes impossible to confront, because every honest word feels like violence, even when it's the only sane thing left to say. She says she wants balance, mutual respect, emotional safety, but watch closely. She's allowed to disappear without warning. You're toxic if you need clarity. She can shame you publicly. You're controlling if you ask for privacy. She can reject your truth, but you're oppressive if you don't affirm hers. This isn't equality. This is a rigged emotional hierarchy where she always has the moral high ground because she's a woman doing the work. Žižek would say, when ideology absorbs the individual, it stops being about truth and becomes about power. And that's what this is now, power. But not through strength or earned respect, through emotional immunity, through the permanent claim to victimhood. She doesn't want fairness, she wants to win without ever being seen as the aggressor. She wants full access to your love, attention, forgiveness, and silence, with none of the accountability that true partnership demands. Because as long as she can pull the historical card, women have been hurt for centuries, she doesn't need to check herself. She just needs to remind you of your guilt. And when empowerment becomes revenge dressed as virtue, narcissism thrives. She doesn't grow, she just becomes more untouchable, more righteous, more convinced that anything she does in the name of healing is above reproach. You are not her equal. You are her justification. Žižek warned, when someone hides behind ideology, they can become monstrous while still believing they're the hero. And that's what you're up against. Not a wounded woman, but a system that rewards emotional tyranny, as long as it's done with soft words and the right hashtags. You were never dealing with a relationship. You were dealing with a system. A system that told her, if you feel it, it must be true. If you hurt him, it must be healing. If he disagrees, it must be abuse. It's not that she set out to destroy. It's that she was taught to never stop protecting herself, even when she became the one causing harm. That's the modern twist. She doesn't need to be cruel. She just needs to believe she's doing the right thing. And in a culture where emotional harm is treated like moral capital, the more fragile she appears, the more power she holds. Žižek would say, she doesn't see you. She sees what you represent, a symbol, a threat, a stand-in for everything she's been told to fear. So when she silences you, rewrites you, invalidates you, it's not personal, but it is devastating. Because somewhere in the process of empowerment, she stopped being a person. She became a role, a story, an ideology wrapped in a face. And the moment you stepped outside that script, the moment you stopped feeding the illusion, you were no longer needed. That's the hardest truth. You weren't loved, you were useful, you were functional, until you weren't. And the freedom she talks about now, It's not clarity, it's just the absence of accountability. So what do? You stop chasing the apology that's never coming. You stop arguing with someone who's immune to contradiction. And you stop mistaking emotional language for emotional depth. Because real power doesn't hide behind pain, and real love doesn't demand silence to survive. If this woke something in you, if you felt that quiet, gut-level knowing that none of this is what it pretends to be, like, share, comment. Not for revenge, not for bitterness, but because the only antidote to narcissism disguised as virtue is truth spoken without fear. And some of us are done staying quiet.